Good morning and good afternoon. This is Gary Paquette from Nlyte Software, and today's topic is how organizations use next generation technology asset management for compliance. One of the first things that we like to explain to people is understanding what situational awareness is. And basically what it is the understanding of everything that you have in your organization, where it is, who's using it, and how it's changing over time. And once you can factor all of that in and measure that, it allows you to make better business decisions and also take control of your environment from the software side, the hardware side, and also from the environmental issues within your organization. That helps from a security perspective, helps for capacity planning, and it helps also for growth, mergers and acquisitions. As far as compliance, well, there's the alphabet soup of everything that you can see in the market today. You have Sarbanes-Oxley, always known as SOX compliance. You have HIPAA on the medical side, on how things are regulated from a security perspective. There's regular security compliance that we're seeing more and more being set up within organizations, and rightfully so. If you ever follow what's happening in the news and media about security breaches and break-ins or breakouts very often. There's also a great initiative on the federal government side in the US called the Data Center Optimization Initiative. We'll talk about that a little bit further on. GDPR in the European communities, and also the BSA, the Software Alliance side of the house, in where they can actually come in and audit you, or they audit for a vendor or publisher for license management and being able to track the entitlements to your systems. So there's these, and there's many, many more, depending on where you are geographically, and also your organization might put their own regulatory or compliance programs in place. Many people, when you talk to them about compliance, their first line of thought is the desktop environment. And your network infrastructure is part of what compliance is. Everything hooked up from the technology side, when you're looking at technology asset management as a whole, has to be included within your compliance guidelines. In other words, you have to go from the internet. You don't have to worry about the internet, but you're going to go from the internet, the firewalls internally, to the routers and switchers, to your servers, physical or virtual, your wireless equipment, your network printers is another big one, your workstations, your laptops, your road warriors, in where they don't come into the office, but that has to also be in check from an auditing perspective, your wireless communication devices, and everything in between. This can also include managed power strips, power distribution units, webcams, etc. If they're all hooked up to your network infrastructure, you need to know about it. Now, different individuals within your organization care more about specific segments, but if you're putting a technology asset management system in place to be able to do compliance, everything has to be tracked in one central repository, understand the dependencies between each other, and what's being delivered to the organization. So let's start with the good. The Data Center Optimization Initiative, DCOI for short, is a U.S. federal government program put in place. And since 2016, their cost savings, and this is a website, by the way, you can see the link on screen, that changes on a regular basis, is nearly $2 billion in savings or cost avoidance. So they've closed 210 tiered data centers to date, over 3,000 non-tiered data centers. So you can start seeing that if you put guidelines or compliance in place and put a playbook in where everybody understands what the rules of the game are, then everybody can actually enforce the initiative or the compliance within your organization. To be able to do this, they needed very detailed information about the equipment they had, the dependencies, the services they're delivering, the applications and software on it, and also what the hardware, if the hardware actually had any load or not, because sometimes they could take physical environments and virtualize them, or virtual environments and spread them out across the organization to balance the load within their infrastructure. So as you can see, if you put a good program in place, there's a really good upside to compliance from the DCOI side of the house. The bad, well, we hear often about Sarbanes-Oxley, and we're starting to see more and more push from regulatory organizations and firms around Sarbanes-Oxley. And basically what it is the corporate responsibility for for financial reporting. And it's section 906 in the SOX guidelines. And it basically, if you take a look at it, it addresses what the penalties are. And under the section, you can see here that you could be fined up to $5 million or upwards of $5 million. It could be up to 20 years in prison for the financial team within your organization, or the CFO specifically gets targeted. And what we're seeing is that normally publicly traded companies are under the microscope under mergers and acquisitions, in where compliance has to be addressed, especially, like I say, for publicly traded companies. They need to be able to correctly represent their financials. So when you think about it, you're taking a look at your hardware equipment during an M&A activity. You're taking a look at the software that the licenses are going to have to be transferred. You're taking a look at all of the rest of the equipment, the maintenance agreements, and everything. That has to be part of the financial package being acquired. Now, often publicly traded companies are acquiring private companies, so the audit from the financial side, the audit from the technology side is just as important, including the intellectual property. Now for the ugly. I don't know if most of you saw this just over a year ago. The city of Denver was in a very heavy audit by Oracle, and basically they had a shortfall of $10 million in licenses. So things grew organically, things weren't being reported, additional cores were being added to databases. The organizations, the city of Denver, I should say, was basically looking at this as from an organizational perspective, that each individual department was following the guidelines for being able to report and self-audit themselves. Well, that didn't work out too well, as you can see here. They were able to settle for $3 million, but basically they got published, it got put into the news, so they paid a great price from a compliance perspective on something they could have actually rectified by just being able to put in place a solid technology asset management solution and self-auditing themselves on a regular basis. So what do we look for in the next generation IT asset management solution? One of the key guidelines that I always tell people is technology has evolved in the last couple of decades, and it always will. And in certain areas, it's exponential. But today, being able to do things with agentless technology is one of the quickest ways to get results. And what I mean by that is with proper credentials, you can set up an agentless-based solution in where within the first day, you should be able to see data starting to roll in. You won't get your whole organization in one day. That would be a nice thing, but that's not going to happen in large organizations. But the nice thing is that you don't have to install anything on the target system. You don't have to worry about managing agents within the environment. You don't have to worry about agents butting heads or being a security breach because they're opening ports and transferring traffic that way. And then there's certain devices you just blatantly can't put an agent on. The other advantage with agentless technology is it will find things by sweeping your enterprise that you probably don't even know exist. And that's one of the key factors of the agentless solutions. The other one is make sure that if you are going to go agentless, that you are also are looking at a multi-protocol system. So that's one of the key questions you should be asking. So if you're going to talk to a Windows system as an example, a lot of vendors out there will basically say, well, we use WMI. Well, that's nice if WMI is there and fully functional, but what do you do when WMI is either corrupted or not fully functional or disabled altogether? Well, you need to be able to extract that information by using a different method to be able to pull that data and get your hardware data, your configuration, the applications that are being delivered on those targets. At the same time, your solution should also be multi-vendor and platform independent. And what I mean by that is it doesn't make any difference if it's Cisco or Juniper or HP or Dell or EMC or F5. Your technology should be able to adapt to the platform and also to the vendor, collect the core information that you need. Sometimes you'll need more detailed information, and typically by configuration you can do that, but you should be able to get base core information about the device. Example is the manufacturer, the model, the serial number, and pertinent information from an asset management perspective of what that device is delivering as a service. Make sure you cover all aspects of your infrastructure, including IoT. We're starting to see more and more webcams. We're starting to see light controllers. We're starting to see all kinds of sensors being put into the network. A lot of them are not secure. So it's important to understand what is being installed. Some departments are doing it without going through security. They just hook it up to the wireless network or to a wired network without necessarily understanding the implications of what they're doing. So your solution should be able to pick these up and let you know that they exist within your environment. The other aspect is also the physical and virtual side. So in the server class machines, you've got your VMwares and your Oracle virtual machines and hypervisors on the Microsoft side. So you want to be able to do that. And then at the desktop, you've got your VDIs, your virtual desktops. And you should be able to track those at the same time. So they also constitute a liability and a risk within your organization. So for compliance issues, they need to be tracked at the same time. Capture all the services being delivered. What are those systems actually doing within your infrastructure? What service are they delivering? So again, for compliance, that's a key factor, but it also helps you on your return on investment and how do you drop your operating costs. So capturing what they're delivering as a service. If they're not delivering anything as a service or they should be retired, here's a great opportunity to actually apply the knowledge from the data that you're collecting within the infrastructure. Understanding all the applications and software. Well, that's one of the auditing side I'm going to talk a little bit more about further down here. But the understanding of applications is the low-hanging fruit for the vendors, and for most organizations, it's actually the easiest thing to do if you have the proper technology to capture the information. And again, you should be able to do your Windows platforms, your Macintosh platforms, your Linux platforms, your Unix platforms. Those are the platforms often that have the expensive software. So you want to be able to capture that data and put it into a single repository where you can actually generate these reports. So software license compliance. We see this plastered all the time, and that's what is keeping people up at night from the technology side and even from the finance department. It's the biggest nightmare out there. Seems like publishers and software vendors nearly do it on purpose to make it complicated and difficult to track. But there's ways for you to be able to at least get an audit report out of an asset management system. So if you keep your technology asset management up to date and it's able to capture the applications and the software installed on it, it's easy for you to generate a report. And it will break it down typically by version number or build number, so that way you know you're up to date on your patches. So there's a lot of side benefits to doing software license compliance. Goes beyond the desktop. Data center, big forgotten hole for most organizations. Expensive software, expensive licenses, complex licensing in the data center. So both aspects from the desktop to the data center have to be covered. If you're being audited by a vendor, guess what? The other ones are going to start watching what happens. And if you're found to be non-compliant, guess who's going to be good knocking on the door next? The next big vendors are going to come along and you're going to want the same thing. So it's just basically a snowball effect at this point, where it's going to start small and it's going to keep on getting larger until you solve the problem and be able to generate a report ahead of time to be able to say, hey, this is my position, I'm clean from a licensing perspective, or we have to adjust our licensing. Another thing that I hear on a regular basis is we can't afford to do technology asset management program. And you go, really? Actually, the answer is you can't afford not to do it. And the reasons are a very long list. We see that, to give you an example, if you do get an audit report, a small to mid-sized company normally takes 18 person days just to do a simple audit. So when you think about it, you've lost the productivity of those people or that person for over a month, workday wise, just to be able to generate a report. You still haven't solved the problem. And this was an article that was published in the ITAM Review a little while back. And it's important to understand that, it's not if it's going to happen if you get into an audit, it's basically when. And we're starting to see more and more. We're seeing anywhere between 300 to 400 audits per year across the world right now. The other issue that you're going to have is that there's no consistency on how the software providers actually license their software. In fact, with some vendors, it even depends on who purchased it and who negotiated the agreement. So as an example, company ABC, not to pick on anybody in particular, says, okay, I've got a database that's going to be licensed this way. Somebody else went and negotiated another deal somewhere else. Now you've got 3 or 4 software license agreements for the same application within one infrastructure. And that's where the software audit helps you kind of ring that in and be able to control that. And like I say, the offset of all of this really helps you down the road. We're starting to see more and more people with operating system migrations. Don't forget Windows 7 end of life coming in January 2020. So people are taking a look at the data of the applications they have to validate that it's actually upgradable and will run on Windows 10. We're seeing it on the Macintosh side at the same time. So you're seeing it on the Linux side. So you're seeing multiple programs being put in place to be able to create these playbooks on who can get upgraded on OS migration. Same thing for security. Often people are not getting broken into, they're getting broken out of. And typically it's from environments that even security and IT don't even know exists. Now it's easy to secure what you know about, but what do you do about the unknown? And we'll talk about that a little bit further down. So where do you start? Well, the first thing you need to do is control the chaos. And that's, that's from day one with everybody you talk to, go, yes, I want to be able to do this. I know I have to do this. Where do I start? The first thing you need to be able to do is actually establish your technology baseline. Get a solid asset management solution in place that will do the discovery and inventory for you and be able to capture that information. And establishing the baseline is when the numbers start flattening out. In other words, you don't see large increases in numbers. They kind of flattened out. And now that you know that you've established your baseline, you validate the data, and then you move to the next step. Then you also need to gather as much pertinent information about those assets as you can. Go get the contracts if you can, go get the warranty agreements, pull everything that you can together to be able to start feeding the system the data that's needed to be able to manage this ongoing. It's a little bit of a hit up front, everybody knows that. There's great people out there that can help you with that from on the services side, so that way you can reconcile all the information. Some of the data that we normally try to connect to, a good asset management solution should hook up to your fixed asset system. Why? Well, you want to be able to reconcile from the compliance side what's on the books on the fixed asset system versus what's in the environment. Then you've got your operating costs versus your fixed costs, and you want to be able to track that. You want your system to hook into your directory services. Why? It helps actually automate the process of linking desktop computers and laptop computers to the end user. That's fully automated. Same thing with HR. If you can't get some of the information, or you can only get baseline information from your directory services, like LDAP and Active Directory, the HR system can supplement that data for you and creating more and more touch points where you have rich data to report from. Hooking it into service management is a basic functionality of asset management. They go side by side. And once the technicians can see what they're working with from a hardware configuration or software perspective, it actually reduces your cost of being able to deliver that service to your organization. Hooking into order management so that we can see what's coming in, what's in, and automatically link from that point on your purchases directly, either software or hardware, to what's in your organization or what's coming into your organization. That's your first step. What do we do with the data? Now that you got
truckloads and truckloads of data, the first thing you have to do is let the system do some data analytics for you and validate the data for asset integrity. In other words, you want to be able to see what you have, understanding who your vendors are. Why? Consolidate, consolidate, consolidate. You can drive better deals by consolidating who your vendors are. You can make great business decisions from the data that you've collected. So that way you can, if you can actually upgrade a certain environment. You can take a look at what's happening from the auditing side on the software side. You've got the hardware side to be able to do business decisions. If you have high growth, if you're doing mergers and acquisitions, what are you actually getting from that organization, etc. Who's using what and why? This also helps you be able to understand, do you really need full suites of applications? All to figure out that 90% of the people are using a sampling of those. So it gives you some understanding on who's doing what with what and being able to consolidate that data and use the data analytics to make business decisions again on that side of the house. Where the assets are located affects taxes, it affects compliance issues. If you have a company that's worldwide, you're going to have compliance issues, different ones based on geographical location. So understanding how that's associated to the assets is key to the asset management system. In fact, again, I always come back and tell people asset management is the relationship between people, places, and things. And your things are all your technology assets. It also, you can do some reporting on the security side. What systems don't match standard profile, which ones have specific ports open, which ones are network segments that are insecure. Let's say we found a subnet that nobody knew about. Are there ports, as an example, on a air conditioning unit, a cooling unit, or a chiller outside in your parking lot that's connected to your internal network? We've seen this before. Drive up to the parking lot, hook in a laptop with a Ethernet cable, and now you're inside the environment. And they put all these fancy passwords all over the place for the Wi-Fi, but they forgot that somebody could just plug a hard wire into something that's plugged outside the building. Then you'd also be able to take a look at it from the software asset management side. And the most important thing I always take a look at is, what do I have that I never knew about that's inside my infrastructure, and why is it there? So compliance, what does it help you with? At the same time, it's the bridge, and you're bridging the gap between the CIO and CFO. And you've got the business operational side, you've got the technology side of the house. Often they've agreed to disagree. But if you look at the data together, the CFO is looking at the data because it's linked to their internal systems, and the CIO is looking at it because it's linked to their internal systems from a service management side, and you put and consolidate that data together, think about the power of the data set that you now have within your organization, add machine learning on top of that with AI, and let the system do the work for you, where you end up with these playbooks. So one, it allows you to greatly reduce your cost of operations, your TCO. A lot of people say total cost of ownership, but I call it total cost of operations because that's what's costing you money, and how to lower that. Lower your operating costs, critical, exposure in critical areas where you have intellectual property that you need to be able to reduce the risk and liabilities. And also, a lot of organizations just want to know what their current state is. Again, back to the baseline. What does everything look like today? How did it change over time? So the life cycle of how all of the data is changing over its life cycle until you dispose of it. And the disposal process is just as important in compliance, but certain areas will require you to get a disposal certificate. That way it releases you from risk and liability of those assets down the road. That's the end of the presentation today. I want to thank everybody for the short presentation. Hopefully you've learned a little from this. And if you do have any questions, please let us know. We'd be more than happy to answer them for you. Goodbye.